Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin, Daf Kaf Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Cohn on the yurtzeit of her father, Rav Dov Chaim Ben Ze'ev, Zichrono Livracha, on his 9th yurtzeit, who taught all his 5 daughters Talmud and the love of Torah. Abba, since I've been doing Daf Yomi with Rabbanit Michelle, I'm reminded of your beautiful teachings and feel your presence every morning as I learn the daf. We're going to get started now. I'm going to go back to the end of yesterday's daf because you have to really understand it well in order to be able to move on. So the structure of the end of yesterday's daf went with number 1, a question on, the whole question here is, can you redeem part way? We saw that the words umatzah kedei geulato, which was said by the Eved Ivri who sold to a Gentile, shows that you have to sell completely. Meaning when you redeem, I'm sorry, no, one second. So I don't get it wrong. The Kedei Gulato, let me actually pull up the psukim and then I'll remember exactly where it says. Sorry. Matzah Kedei Gulato is in the section of selling land. Okay, Machar Mistech Huzato, when you sell land, we're going to talk about selling land in a if you have a field in a non-walled city. When you redeem it, you have to redeem it completely. And then we started with the question. Sorry, now I just got confused for a minute. If you sell an Eved Ivri, let's say I sell myself to a Gentile, we're also, there's an idea of redeeming. Is it the same? Can I redeem, let's say somebody has, or I have the money, or my relative has the money to redeem me part way, can we do that? And the answer was no. Okay, we learned it from Staff Huzah, just like there were Matzah Kedei Gulato, you have to have all the money to be able to redeem. Also here you have to have all the money to be able to redeem. Okay, that was the first question. Then the second question that Rav Shesha was asked from Rav Huna Bar Chinana was, what if you sell a house in a walled city? Okay, so here are the psukim in Vayikra. Okay, I have all the psukim on the page here. I cut off kind of a lot of the extra psukim so you don't see everything. You can focus. Ish kimkor beit moshav ir choma. You have a year to redeem it. After that, you can no longer redeem it. What about, it doesn't say anything, can your relative redeem? So can your relative redeem or not? Then we brought Rabbi Shimon, and we said that Rabbi Shimon says basically that you can redeem. And why? He used these words, yupakocho, hulakocho. We're going to see those a lot today. How exactly to translate them is a good question, but basically what it means is, what Rabbi Shimon said, logically, we're going to compare the case of if somebody sells a field in a non-walled city versus someone who sells a house in a walled city. Later, we'll get to what if you sell a house in a non-walled city, okay? And that we're going to see is the exact same thing as selling a field in a non-walled city, okay? So we'll get to that soon. But right now, we're comparing a field in a non-walled city, which it says your relative can redeem, to selling a house in a walled city, which your relative can't redeem. And I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with the later. Not the relative now we're talking about. We're talking about, can it be partially redeemed? Okay, so matzah kedei gulato by Seach Huzah means it can't be partially redeemed. But we're not going to apply the same logic to someone who wants to redeem their house in a walled city. And why is that? Because, okay, and here's my chart with all the details, because this is really important before we start today's daf, that we have all these details straight. Because we're going to talk about selling a field in a non-walled city. We're going to talk about selling a house in a walled city. And we're going to talk about sanctifying a field in a non-walled city. So here are the details you need to know before we start. If you sell, let's say, again, the idea in all these cases is I don't have money. So I sell my field, but we want to give you a way to get it back. So firstly, if we want people to be able to sell their fields, the first thing you have to know is if you sell your field and we want to be a label to be to buy it, we have to make it good for the seller. So people don't like to buy things that they know maybe the next day someone's going to buy back, right? Normally you rent a house, right? You have a contract for at least a year. Sometimes you have an option for 2 or 3 years because you don't want to move twice. So, twice in 2 years. So sometimes you get them to commit to give it to you for a while. That's the idea of the Staff Huzah. I sell a field in a non-walled city. I can redeem it back, and I haven't told the Yovel year to do it. And if I don't do it before the Yovel year, it will anyway go back to me, but I can't do it for the first 2 years. If I'm skipping down to the third one, if I sell a house in a walled city, I can actually buy it back right away, but only for 1 year. After that, I can't buy it back anymore. And it doesn't go back to me in the Yovel year. Okay. if I sanctify a field in a non-walled city, what means it goes to the temple. What does that really mean? It means the value goes to the temple. So at some point, I'm supposed to redeem it, which means I give the value and I get it back. I own it now because I took the sanctity off by putting the sanctity into the money. But if I don't redeem it, so first of all, I can redeem it at any point, because obviously we always want the temple to get the money. So immediately I can redeem it. And I have till the Jubilee year. If I didn't redeem it by the Jubilee year, or if someone else redeemed it, it automatically goes to the Kohanim. Okay? It doesn't go back to me. So now, what happens here? We start with this Braita Eitive. I'm starting 7 lines from the bottom of Kaf Amud Bet. So what we did so far in the Gemara was bring Rabbi Shimon, who basically says, since Mocher Stea Chuzah is very easy to redeem, right? And yet the halacha is I cannot redeem it part way because of the words Umatzah Kedei Gulato, then logic would state that, right now, this is going to be like a seesaw. If something's easier to redeem, and yet there's something that makes it harder to redeem, well, the Mocher Bayit B'Batei Rechoma, which is much harder to redeem, I have a lot less control because I only have a year. Well, logic would say that we're actually going to make it easier, though, for me to redeem and allow me to redeem it part way. Okay, and allow me to borrow money to redeem. But I'm not really focusing on the borrowing money because that's not something they're really talking about. It comes up, but it's not, the focus was really, can I redeem it part way? That was Rabbi Shimon. Now we bring a Braita that's a little bit complicated. The structure for the first big part of today is going to be, number one, they're bringing this Braita to contradict, because the very last line in this Braita contradicts. I just remembered that I didn't finish fixing something on the chart. Okay, I have to fix something on the chart. There's something that's wrong here, right over here. So I'm going to just make a little X here and I'm going to fix it. I think I can do that. Let me see. Let's see. Yeah, I can make an X there. Okay, I'll have to fix that after class. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to have a Braita. And the Braita is going to explain. And the whole point of bringing this Braita is just for the last line. Where the last line of this Braita, I'm already going to tell you, because otherwise it just gets confusing where we're going. The very last line of the Braita is that, remember, Rav Sheshet was asked, if you sell a house in a walled city, can you redeem it part way? And his answer was yes, based on Rabbi Shimon. And here the Braita is going to say the exact opposite. And the Braita here is not going to bring logic here. They're just going to say it's a fact on the ground that someone who sells someone who sells a house in a walled city cannot redeem it part way. The exact opposite of what we said before. And then the Gemara is going to resolve it. But after the Gemara resolves it, they're going to go really in depth into all the logic that was stated in this Braita that we're going to read right now and kind of tear it apart and try to put it back together. That's what's going to happen for the first whole part. So let's read it inside. Eitive. So Eitive means we're going to raise a question on an Amora, Rav Sheshet here, who said, again, someone who sells a house in a walled city can redeem it part way. Okay, can. And this source is going to say the opposite. But till we get there, it'll take some time. Im ga'ol yigal, milamed shelavev go'el v'go'el l'chatzim. This is quoting a pasuk by someone who sanctifies a field. Someone who sanctifies a field in a non-walled city, it says, if he redeems it, but it says it in double language. Ga'ol yigal. What do we learn from double language? Double language teaches you more options. What are the more options? You can even redeem it part way, and you can also borrow money to redeem. Okay, that's a drasha. Now, you're going to have to keep remembering this, because if we don't remember this, we're going to get confused. The next part is to basically come and explain, why do we need a drasha? And here's where I forgot. I need to fix this on my sheet. I just did this quickly this morning. This is a mistake. It's not a difficulty. This is just, why do we learn it from a drasha? Okay, that's really what's happening right now. Why do we learn this from a drasha? Because if we didn't learn it from a drasha, logic would have stated the opposite. So what we now need to prove is that logically, I would have thought that someone who sanctifies a field in a non-walled city would not be able to redeem it part way, and that's why we need a drasha. Okay, that's the main point of what we're trying to do, and we're going to have to keep going back to this, because when we question this whole thing, we're going to always keep going back to that. Why would logic state it can't be? And why do you need a drasha then, right? Which explains why you would need a drasha to say you can redeem it part way. And again, we're talking about the sanctified case. So they're going to say, Yachov alodinu. And now they're going to do a different logic than we had before. I'm now 5 lines from the bottom of Chafam Bet. If you sell a steach chuzah, a non-walled city property, you have a lot of koch, right? Because if Yovel comes and you didn't redeem it, it's going to go back to you. So that gives the seller a lot of strength. And yet, but you can't redeem it part way. That's a given. We learned that from the pasuk. So therefore, a makdish, someone who has less control, if I sanctify it and I don't redeem it, what happens? It goes to the kohanim in the Jubilee year. So, since I'm weaker in general, I have less power as a seller, right? I sold my property. I have less power to get it back. Well, then I should have less power across the board. It's the opposite of what we said before. If you have less power, we'll make it easier for you on the other end. But here we're saying, no. If you have less power, you have less power across the board. If that's ein loveh v'goel l'chatzim, then this is also ein loveh v'goel l'chatzim. That's why you needed the drasha. Now they say, wait a minute, that logic is tricky. So now there should be a difficulty on this logic, and then we'll answer the logic. The difficulty is, wait a minute. But wait, if you sell steach chuzah, you actually have less power. You're not in a position of strength. You're in a position of strength as regards the Jubilee year, but you're not in a position of strength because you can't buy it back for years 1 and 2. And tomar b'makdish yupach miyad. But the one who sanctified it can actually redeem it immediately. That means he has more power to redeem. So if logic would then state, if I can redeem it immediately, and the steach chuzah I couldn't. So let's say like this: steach chuzah, I'm weaker, I can't redeem it immediately, and therefore I can't redeem it part way. But a makdish that I can redeem immediately, I should be able to also redeem it part way. In which case, what do I need a drasha for? Logic would state that. To which the Gemara says, "Mocher bayit," but the Braita says, "Mocher bayit bebaterei choma yochiach." We're going to combine steach chuzah and mocher bayit, and from there teach that logic would state. Again, we're always trying to get back to this line. Logic would state that someone who sanctifies a field in a non-walled city should not be able to redeem part way. Why? Because yupa kocholi ge'el miyad ve'ein loveh v'go'el l'chatzim. Well, the mocher bayit has the same position of strength as the makdish. Both of them can redeem immediately, right? Now, both of them, they don't get back in the Yovel year, so they're both weak, but they both have something of strength that the steach chuzah doesn't have. So the combination of steach chuzah, okay, now I'll pull up in the chart and I'll show you where I mean in the chart here. Mocher steach chuzah can't be bought back till after 2 years, but returns in the Jubilee year, and you can redeem it up until the Jubilee year. So it's got a position of strength and a position of weakness. The mocher bayit b'baterei choma can be redeemed immediately, but only for 1 year. So it's also got a position of strength and a position of weakness. And the makdish is like both of them. It can be redeemed immediately, and it can be redeemed till the Jubilee year, even though it's like the mocher, right, where it doesn't go back in the Jubilee year, but you have up to the Jubilee year. So what do you see here? If both those have this almost, right, one kind of cancels out the other, they both, in the end, from there you can learn if both of those, now here, you have to get it, it's fact on the ground, according to this Braita, that mocher steach chuzah and mocher bayit b'baterei choma, neither one can be redeemed part way. And therefore, the makdish steach chuzah, from the combination of the two, logic would state it can't be redeemed part way, which means that's why you need the drasha. Im ga'ol yigal, going back to the first line of the Braita, you have a special words in the pasuk to tell you, double language, it actually can be redeemed part way. And logic would have stated otherwise. That's why you need a drasha. That's the Braita. If you don't understand it well enough, we're going to attack, kind of take it apart and reinterpret it, because there's things that don't exactly jive 100% anyway. To which the Gemara, this part is very simple. The Gemara says, oh, you have a contradiction, this Braita and the one that Rav Sheshet relied on? Not difficult. What did we say? Rav Sheshet, when he said the answer is yes, you can, right? You can be redeemed, learns it from Rabbi Shimon. So the very simple answer is Ha Rabbanan, Ha Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that mocher bayit, right? Again, what was the problematic line here? The problematic line in this Braita was the very last line that said a mocher bayit b'baterei choma will prove because it's ein loveh v'goel. You can't be goel l'chatzein. He took it as a fact. There was no logic here. It was just a fact. The logic was to the makdish, to the one who sanctifies. But the mocher was 100% clear in this braita, cannot be redeemed partially. That's very simple. That's the rabbi's opinion. And the braita that Rav Sheshet was relying on, that he quoted, was Rabbi Shimon, who says yes. So we basically have a basic machloket about the facts on the ground about mocher bayit b'batei rechoma. Is it yes or is it no? Can it be redeemed partway? Can it no? From now on in today's daf, we're going to be exclusively focused on the rabbis who say that just like mocher steach huzak can't be redeemed partway, someone who sells a house in a walled city also can't be redeemed partway. Okay, but before we get there, we have one more line. Just like we just said, the braita we quoted before was Rabbi Shimon, this braita was the rabbis. We're going to say the same thing here. There's two braitos about a mocher bayit, someone who sells a house in a walled city. One says, loveh v'goel v'goel l'chatzein, it can be redeemed partway. V'tanya idach, and one says, ein loveh v'goel v'goel l'chatzein, it cannot be redeemed partway, and you can't borrow money to redeem. And lo kasha, don't worry, this is not difficult. Ha Rabbanan, ha Rabbi Shimon. One is Rabbanan, one is Rabbi Shimon. Okay, that's just very simple. Now we get to the part that's a little bit more complicated because we're going to tear apart this kal v'chomer and kind of throw this logic, opposite logic, back and forth till we get to really understanding how, again, now we have to zoom in on particularly what we were learning in that braita. What we wanted to learn was one who sanctified a steach huzah, why you needed a drasha to say that loveh v'goel v'goel l'chatzein, and proving that logic would have stated otherwise. Logic would have told you no. Logic from what? Logic from the steach huzah and the mocher bayit b'batei rechoma, the one who sold in a non-walled city a field, and the one who sold a house in a walled city. The combination of the two, since both of them you can't redeem part way, we would have thought the same about the makdish. So now we're going to tear apart this logic a little bit and put it back together. Amar le Rav Acha b'rei Rav le Rav Ashi. Ikal mifrach. What kind of kal chomer is this? What kind of logic? You can knock out the logic. You could say, Ma lemocher bayit b'batei rechoma sheken hura kocho ligael miyat leolam. You can't learn from a mocher bayit to the makdish because a mocher bayit can't redeem until the Jubilee year. Tomar b'makdish yupak kocho ligael leolam. We, in the end, the last line was to learn it from the mocher bayit b'batei rechoma. But a mocher bayit b'batei rechoma is much weaker than the makdish sadeh, because a mocher bayit can only buy it back in the first year, whereas the one who's sanctified has all the way until the Jubilee year to redeem it. So if it has all the way to the Jubilee year, then on that logic, we could say maybe you also could partially redeem it. Okay, because again, as if you keep going with this logic, as long as you have more power to redeem, it would then allow for more options of redemption. So Amar Rav Acha Saba le Rav Ashi, Mishum Di'ika Lamimar Nehader Dina, Tite B'mehatzad. Okay, so now he's going to say the following. And here's a chart. Okay, what's a b'mehatzad? B'mehatzad is what we call in math the least common denominator. In the end, they don't learn it only from the mocher bayit. They learn it from someone who sold a field in a non-walled city and someone who sold a house in a walled city. And what we're going to show here, okay, and here we're going to have it. Each one is yipak kocho in one way and hura kocho in one way. And then each one, because this one has strength in one area and that one has strength in another area. At the end, each of those unique things about them are going to be canceled out, and we're going to go by what's the least common denominator. This happens very often in logical arguments where we say it can't be that that's what gives him, like that's what's causing the halacha, because we see a different case where we can't do that, and yet it has the same halacha. Because remember, I even put here, it's according to Chachamim, we're dealing with facts on the ground that both of them cannot be redeemed part way. And yet each have strengths and weaknesses that are opposite of the other. So that's going to cancel out all the strengths and weaknesses and end up with the least common denominator. That's what we're going to do right now. So Titi B'mehatzad, let's learn it from there. Mocher steach huzah yochiach, sheyipak kocho ligael leolam, ve'en lo v'goel l'chatzein. Ma lemocher steach huzah, sheken hura kocho ligael miyad. This basically says a steach huzah has the power to be redeeming forever, and you can't redeem it part way, and yet forever again means until the Jubilee year. But the mocher steach huzah also can't be redeemed right away. And the Mocher Bayit will prove. In other words, again, Mocher Steach Huzah can be redeemed forever, but the Mocher Bayit can't be redeemed forever. And the Mocher Steach Huzah can't be redeemed immediately, but the Mocher Bayit can be redeemed immediately. So each one has strength, weakness. In the end, we say, so therefore, lo v'chazar adin, and therefore it goes back. Lo rizeh kirizeh, that one's not like that one. We go with the least common denominator. That's in the words here. Atzad hashaveh shebehen. What's the least common denominator? Well, the least common denominator is they're both cases shenigalim. They're both cases where something gets redeemed. And what else is the common denominator between them? There's redemption. However, the redemption is limited. Limited to what? You can't borrow money to redeem, and you also can't redeem part way. So therefore, Afani Avi Makdish. Well, Makdish, someone who sanctifies, has the exact same least common denominator. What is that? Nigal, right? It's redeemed. And therefore, the second thing should be true about it as well. And with that, he puts back the Kal V'chomer. And he said, that's how the Kal V'chomer logic works. He's basically explaining more in detail what that Breita said. What the Breita really said is, each one where they have more power to redeem is knocked out by the other, which doesn't have that power. And each one that's weaker knocks out. And in the end, we're left with the least common denominator. It's a case where you can redeem, and you can redeem part way. Must be anywhere you can redeem part way. Makdish falls perfectly into that category, which again, I just want to remind you, this puts us back in logic would state a Makdish Steach Huzah. If I sanctify to the temple, and let's say I only have money to redeem part of it, I wouldn't be able to. That's why you need the Pasuk Ga'ol Yigal to teach you. You can redeem it part way. There's a special drasha because logic would have stated otherwise. We're not done yet. Because Amar Marzutra Bereder of Mary Ravina, what are you talking about? This common denominator, least common denominator, doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Ikalamifra. You might have paid attention to the detail, you might have not. But there's one place where the Makdish has more power than both. Okay? Right? Because what did we learn? A Makdish can do it till the Jubilee year, like the Steach Huzah, and can do it immediately, like the Mocher Bayit. But there's one place where it doesn't overlap with either one of them. What is that? And in which case it's not the least common denominator. There's some place where the Makdish has more strength than the other two. And therefore, we're going to be left with a question here. We're going to knock out this logical argument that you would have thought it can't be redeemed part way. Neither the Steach Huzah or the Bayit B'Batei Choma can be redeemed in year number 2, right? Remember, the Steach Huzah only after 2 years, right? The buyer has an option, right, for 2 years. You can't buy it back. The Mocher Bayit in a walled city can only buy it back in year 1. So even though we can buy it immediately, like the Makdish can do it immediately, but the Makdish can redeem his field immediately and keep it, right, and have the option. If he didn't redeem it the first year, he can redeem it the second year, not the second, the third. He has all his options open until he gets to the Jubilee year. Then it's too late. But he has even year 2. And neither of these people have year 2. So basically, you can't learn from both of them because he's got one up on them, basically. Okay? So therefore, he can redeem it in the second year. And maybe because of that, logic would state, he can also redeem the Chatzaim, he can also redeem part way. And then, where are we left? We have no reason for the drasha. Okay? That's in the next chart on the sheet. I'll show you. Side. Okay, that's on the second sheet already, right? Ha'im yipau rakucha, right? So each of them have a weakness that they can't be redeemed in the second year, and the Makdish can be redeemed in the second year. So therefore, you would come to the conclusion that it can be redeemed part way, okay, not like the others. So Amar le Ravina says, okay, even though the Breita didn't say this, it's like an unstated thing in the Breita, and he basically reads us into the Breita that it's not just learned from those two things. You can see in the next chart on the page, I added a new column, and it's called Eved Ivri. Now, remember what we learned yesterday. An Eved Ivri that's sold to a Gentile is, right, not redeemed part way. That's why I started with it today, so you remember that. So now, can you redeem an Eved Ivri in year 2? Of course you can. So now we're going to say the following. This will prove that the fact that the Makdish can redeem it in the second year doesn't necessarily give him logically the power to say it can be redeemed part way, because every animkar lo vekochavim yochiach sheyupak kocho ligael b'shana shniya ve'ein lo ve'goel l'chatzeim. This is the end of our sugya. Baruch Hashem. Okay, we're now going to say we're learning it from all three. Mocher ste'achuzah, mocher bayit b'batei rechomah. You sell a field in a non-walled city. You sell a house in a walled city, and the Eved Ivri who sold to a Gentile. All three of them, again, each one has a certain koch, but a weakness. The balance of all three gets us to the least common denominator. They're all something that can be redeemed, and they're all something that can't be redeemed partway. And therefore, again, I have to add this word, logic would state that someone who sanctifies a field, who has nothing unique that doesn't appear in all three of the others, basically, can't be redeemed partway. And that's why, going back to the brayta we started with today, im ga'ol yig'al, double language comes to teach you. This is an exception to the rule. It actually is redeemed partway. But you wouldn't be able to get there with logic. That's what we did so far. I know this was a very complicated section. You can try to review it, both with the study guide and maybe even listening again. More clear, but basically the structure of what we did today was we brought a brayta to question Rav Sheshet's ruling that based on Rabbi Shimon, that someone who sells a house in a walled city can partially redeem the land because it's so hard for him to redeem it. Otherwise, he only has a year. We allow any possibilities. We brought a brayta that says the exact opposite, that took it as a given. Mocher bayit cannot be redeemed partway. And we basically said, oh, don't question me from that because that's the rabbi's opinion and I hold by Rabbi Shimon. And there's a machlok at Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. That's very simple. But what became complicated was that brayta, okay, we took it just for the last line, but now the Gemara wanted to understand the whole brayta. The subject of that brayta wasn't someone selling a field in a walled city. The subject was someone who sanctifies a field in a non-walled city or sanctifies a house, sanctifies something in a non-walled city, right? Can he redeem partway? And the answer was yes, because of a drasha, but logic would have stated otherwise. And what we now tried to figure out was how exactly does that logic work? Is that logic fallible or infallible? In the end, we proved that the logic actually works, but we had to add some things along the way. Particularly at the end, we had to add the Eved Ivri issue. Okay, but in general, they added some other things that weren't really explicitly mentioned in that brayta to get to all the really understanding of what was going on in that brayta. And in the end, it's the least common denominator of all three things, even though Eved Ivri wasn't really mentioned there explicitly. Okay, putting that aside, although we will touch on issues similar to this in the continuation. We're back to another question he asked Rav Sheshet. What Rav Huna bar Chinina is really getting at, as usual, and we've been talking about this since we started all the Avadim cases, which is we have all these different cases, both of Avadim and of cases of things that can be redeemed, which that's how we got to this. Slaves can be redeemed, land can be redeemed, right? Land, house, field, all that. So the question is, since the Torah only says certain details by one, does it apply to the others as well? So matzah kedei gulato, we started with only says by se'achuzah. That's the partial. Can we learn to other things or not? That was what we were grappling with. Now we're grappling with another issue, which is, can relatives redeem? So in order to understand this, let's go back to the psukim for a minute. Okay, where does it mention relatives? So it mentions relatives, number one, in Vayikra Kapeh, Pasuk Kapeh. Okay, you sell your land because you don't have money. This is a ste'achuzah. Your relative can come and redeem it for you. There you have it explicitly. Ste'achuzah, relative can redeem. Where else does relative redeeming come along? In the Jew who sells himself to a Gentile. In Pasuk Mem Zayin, in that same chapter in Vayikra Kapeh, it says, if you got sold to a Gentile, after you're sold, you sell yourself, you should be redeemed. One of your brothers, o dodo ben dodo, or your uncle or your cousin, yigalenu, o misher b'saro mimishpachto yigalenu, or some other relative in your family will redeem you. O isiga yado benigal, or you can yourself redeem yourself. So now, we don't really care about yourself here. Now we're focused on relatives redeeming. So we have relatives redeeming in ste'achuzah, and we have relatives redeeming in an Eved Ivri who's sold to a Gentile. So comes Rav Sheshet and he wants to know, well, just like in ste'achuzah, would it apply also to mocher bayit b'batei rechomah? Same type of question as before. Nig'al l'krobim or ain't nig'al l'krobim? Do we say gulato miste'achuzah gamal? Well, let's make a gzera shava. So in pasuk Kaf Vav. Ish lo kiya lo goel. If you don't find a goel, then right, but then you find your own. Umatzah kedei geulato. That says geulato, and there we learn. What did we learn from that pasuk? You can't be goel part way, right? Lechatzaim. But since geulato appears in that section, and geulato appears in the first verse of, doesn't matter if it's the first verse, but it happens to be the first verse of selling a house in a walled city. It says yamim tia geulato. You have a year to redeem it. So you might say, let's learn both the Nigala Chatzim, which is our issue right now, and let's learn the Nigala Krovim, that it's redeemed to relatives. O Dilma, or perhaps we say, where does the pasuk Geula, the word Geulato, come up? In the pasuk that had to do with redeeming part way. But in the pasuk that had to do with the relative, which was the pasuk before, it didn't say Geulato. So maybe we only learn Chatzain. That would be obviously the basis for the rabbis, who it was obvious to them that the Bocher Bayit is also not the Chatzain because of the Gzera Shava. But maybe you only learn the Gzera Shava about the halfway part, and you don't learn the Gzera Shava about the relative part. That's the question. So Rav Sheshet answers very simply without giving an explanation. Amar le eino nigal, not redeemed. Okay, Beit Moshav, your choma, if you're in a walled city, you sell your house, your relative can't redeem it. Only you can redeem it. Eitive. Now we're going to go again to a contradiction against Rav Sheshet. We're going to have a slew of questions against Rav Sheshet. First one from the following Braita. Now they're going to focus on the first word in that verse. In this section of Stei Achuzah, it starts off with this pasuk, Kaf Daled, Ubechol eretz achuzatchem geulat titnu ba'aretz. In all the land where you live, you can redeem your land. Okay, which means basically, right, the land will go back to you in the Jubilee year. Now we learned this otherwise. So, and we learned it up, right? It says it in the next few psukim also. This pasuk is totally unnecessary. So what do they say? This comes to teach you, lirabot batim ve'eved ivri. This comes to teach you that also houses and also Jewish slaves, later we're going to get to the Jewish slaves part, also houses can be redeemed. Houses what? Houses in walled cities. At least we assume. My love, and now, can redeemed in the exact same way. So if the relative can redeem this one, the relative can redeem that one. And that goes against Rav Sheshet, who said the relative can't redeem the house. Right? My love, batei arei, when it says houses, doesn't it mean houses in a walled city? Lo, batei chatzerim. Who's to say that? The section was talking about non-walled cities. Maybe it means, remember, I told you before, it only said field here. It didn't say house in a non-walled city. Maybe it's saying this extra pasuk to say, bechol, everything, even houses in non-walled cities. And then it has nothing to do with our topic, and then it wouldn't be a question here. To which they say, what are you talking about? It says explicitly that all the laws about a house and all the laws about a field in a non-walled city are going to be the same for a house in a non-walled city. And then you don't need this extra pasuk to teach you that. Where is that? Well, okay, we started with Stei Achuzah, pasuk Kaf Daled. In Kaf Tet, we moved to houses in walled cities. In Lamed Aleph, we say, if you have a house that's not in a walled city, it's going to be exactly the same as the field. So there you have it. It says explicitly you don't need a drasha. We're back to saying, if that's the case, then this drasha, bechol, which comes to include houses, must mean houses in a walled city against Rav Sheshet, that the laws are exactly the same, relatives can redeem. To which they answer, no. When it said bechol comes to include houses, it really did mean houses in non-walled cities. Why do you need two psukim to teach the same thing? To teach you, if you had just one pasuk, you'd say, relatives can redeem. The fact that this says it twice, you have to redeem, means you have to redeem. It's now obligation, meaning if you have a relative who sold their field because they didn't have money, if you have the money, you must put up money to help them redeem their field or their house. So that's why it said it's also true for houses that you have to redeem them as well. Okay? Not only does the relative have to redeem the field, but also has to redeem the house. And this, by the way, is a machloket Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. As a relative, do you have to help your relative or not? So here we're going to see first the opinion that says you don't have to, and then we'll get to Rabbi Eliezer. When it says you have to redeem your brother's field, it's permission. You can if you want, you don't have to. Right? Meaning it's a possibility at least. Remember, we just learned it might not be a possibility in every case. How do you know it's permit? It's just you can, but not that you have to, not obligatory. Talmud lomar b'ish ki lo yelo goel. This is a great line. It says a person who doesn't have anyone to redeem, and then it continues to say what you do. How could it be you have no relatives? Everybody has some relative who can help him somewhere. You might have relatives, but it doesn't, right? Every Jew has lots of relatives, but it doesn't mean your relatives want to help you. So, right? That's Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. He basically says, what does it mean you don't have a relative to redeem you? It means your relatives didn't want to, because if they want to, they can opt out. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, he says, what are you talking about? Redeem your brother's field, you have to. How do you know you have to? Maybe it's only permission, optional. Talmud lomar b'chol gu'ulati nua katuv kava'ot chava. That's where we have Rabbi Eliezer. He says that second pasuk comes to teach you, right? Or really, it's the first pasuk. It's chova. Okay, you have to. Amar le Rabbanan le Rabashi. Amar le Ravina le Rabashi. Wait, something about this doesn't jive exactly. Bishlam alamanda amar. Now going back to the first explanation, what did we have? Rav Sheshet said, house in onigala krovim. How did he understand the drasha? Bayit lerabot bayit b'chol gu'ulati nu says houses also, houses in walled cities. Houses in non-walled cities. That's what he had to say. Houses in walled cities, it's not the same rules, the relative can't. So Bishlam Alaman Damar, if you hold that what it really meant in that drasha was L'rabot Batei Choma Hainu Dichtiv Bikol. Bikol would have to include something that we didn't already know to include, which would be houses in walled cities. But Laman Damar, but Rav Sheshet, who said L'rabot Batei Chatzerim, that pasuk was coming to include houses, my Bikol. But if Bikol taught you, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that in a field in a non-walled city, you must help your relative, once you learn that, we already learned that Batei Chatzerim, whatever's true for Steach Huzah is true for the house. You don't need an extra drasha for that. And in fact, that's a difficulty with Rav Sheshet. And here's another difficulty with Rav Sheshet. Okay, now we're jumping to the section where it talks about the relatives who can redeem the Jewish slave sold to a Gentile. It said either your brother Yigalenu, or your cousin or uncle Yigalenu, or any other relative Yigalenu. Why does it say it 3 times? What it's teaching you is, it's coming to say a lot of words, to say all situations where there's a redemption can be redeemed by relatives. Oh, that seems to go against Rav Sheshet, who said, no, not all places, only where it says them. What else would it be teaching? The Batei Choma, the houses in the walled cities, and the Jewish slave who's sold to a Jew, not to a Gentile. Gentile, it says it. To a Jew, maybe your relative can't redeem. So they say, and this would sound like relative can redeem. So they say, lo, Batei Chatzerim u'steach huzah. When it said all the geulot shenigalot like this, well, it means the places where there are redemption by relatives. But then they say, why would you need a pasuk to tell you that? It says it explicitly there. They skipped one important part, which is there it says your brother redeems, and it says, right, by the field, and the house is like the field. So we already know you don't need a special drasha. So they say, what it meant to say is, in the first pasuk by Seach Huzah, it only said your brother. Here it says your brother, your uncle or cousin, and anyone else. What it's to teach you is whenever there's redemption by relatives, which is Steach Huzah and Batei Chatzerot, it means this is the order. First, your brother, we go to him first. If he won't do it, your uncle or cousin. If they won't do it, we go to any other distant relative and say, will you please redeem? And that is like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says somewhere else. Whole next section is going to be, where did Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak say this? And for this, we're going to get into a whole other question, very similar. And the only reason we bring this is to say, where did he say that Yigalenu, Yigalenu, Yigalenu 3 times is to teach you that it's specifically this order, also in Seach Huzah and Batei Choma, and anywhere else. So let's see. There was a question asked. So now we're going into a sugya and a sugya. This we have a lot today, where we're kind of, we already mentioned this. Now we're going to see, where does this come from? So he said it on the following. Now they're asking about the Jewish slave who sold to a Jew. Can he be redeemed by relatives or not? And it's going to be the exact same type of structure. Because again, it says it by the Jew sold to a Gentile, but doesn't say it by a Jew sold to a Jew. Okay, this is a bit of review. We're not going to spend too much time on this because we're really toward the end of our time and not yet the end of our daf. I'll leave it to Rebbe Lotival. We're not going to ask this according to Rebbe because on Daf Tevav Mubed at the top of the daf, if you might remember, Rebbe had this thing about Be'ela, what we learned from Be'ela, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva disagreed. But he says the Amar Misha Eino Nigal Be'ela Nigal B'Shesh. Someone who's not redeemed by relatives is redeemed in 6 years, meaning who gets out in 6 years? The Eved Ivri sold to a Jew. So the Jewish slave sold to a Jew gets out in 6 years, but doesn't get redeemed Be'ela by the relatives. He doesn't get redeemed by relatives at all. There you have an answer, right? So according to Rebbe, there's not even a question. He says it explicitly within his argument. He makes this argument and he says, here's the logic. And the logic is based on an assumption that it's clear that a Jewish slave sold to a Jew does not get redeemed by relatives. Question obviously isn't according to him, because according to him, obviously you can't redeem. Relatives can't redeem. But the question was according to the rabbis who disagree with him, what do they say? Can they be redeemed by relatives or not? What are the two possibilities? And this goes back to things we saw before. Yalfinan Sachir. Remember, Sachir appears by the one sold to a Gentile, and the Sachir appears by one sold to a Jew. So, do we say Xera Shava? What's true for there is true for there. Redeemed by relatives. Also here, redeemed by relatives. Below Darsha Yigalenu, but they don't darshan this Yigalenu, which in a second we'll see what that is. Odilma Yigalenu, it says, right, either your brother, Yigalenu, or this one, Yigalenu. What does it mean, Yigalenu? We'll redeem him specifically, but not anyone else, right? Not this, in this case where you're sold to a Gentile, but not in a case where you're sold to a Jew. So after they ask that question, they bring the following answer. Tashma, again, we're trying to see where Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explained the 3 times Yigalenu as this is the order it should be done, also in the Seach Huzah and the Batei Chatzera. That's all we're trying to get to, but it's going to take a little while to get there. Tashma, b'chol ge'ulat ti'nu. We're going to go back to the drasha we saw before. That first pasuk in the Seach Huzah comes lirabot batim ve'eved ivri. Now, before we were all talking about the house. Now we're focusing on the eved ivri. My la batei rechoma ve'eved ivri ani kar Yisrael. Isn't this coming to say batei rechoma are just like it, nigal krovim, and eved ivri who's sold to a Jew is also nigal krovim, just like the Gentile one? Should be the obvious way of reading it, but that raises problems with Rav Sheshet's explanation before, and also now they're going to say lo. Eved Ivri and Karlo Be Kochavim. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's talking about an Eved Ivri, which means we don't have an answer. Can an Eved Ivri sold to a Jew be redeemed by the relatives? Because this drasha has nothing to do with that. This drasha has to do with an Eved Ivri who's sold to a Gentile, which the Gemara says, I don't need a pasuk for that. Eved Ivri and Karlo Be Kochavim Behedik Tipe. It says it explicitly that he could be redeemed by relatives. O Dodo, O Ben Dodo Yigalenu, right? His uncle or his cousin can redeem him. Now finally moving to Amud Bet. So what do they answer? Oh no, hahu lekava ochova. It is talking about a Gentile, which again means it doesn't answer our question at all, that a Jew sold to a Jew can be redeemed by a relative. Again, we're not yet at the point of why we brought this, because we brought this to find Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He's going to come later. Vafilu Rabbi Yeshua. Here, there's one difference between the way we answered it in the previous. In the previous, we said only Rabbi Eliezer, because it means it's said twice to say you have to do it. Well, you have to do it. Even according to Rabbi Yeshua, who said you don't have to redeem your brother's field if it's in a walled city, or a house if it's in a walled city. Sorry, house, not field. You don't have to redeem someone's house if it's in a walled city. It's not I'm sorry, a mistake. No. You don't have to redeem a Seach Huzah, a field in a non-walled city. Even though it says the relative should do it, it doesn't mean they have to do it. But comes the drasha to say you have to do it. Okay, without that extra pasuk, you would have thought maybe you don't have to, you have to. But only Rabbi Eliezer thought you had to. Right? Rabbi Yeshua thought it was reshut. But in a case where your relative sells himself to a Gentile, you actually, even according to Rabbi Yeshua, you must redeem him. Why is that? Because we don't want them to become not Jewish. We're worried that when they're living in the Gentile's house, it's going to be very hard for them to stay Jewish. And therefore, even in that case, Rabbi Yeshua will agree that you have to redeem. So anyway, we don't have an answer to the Eved Ivri because that drasha wasn't talking about a Jewish slave sold to a Jew. Second attempt to answer the question. Tashma, matamulomar yigalenu shalosh pa'amim. Why does it say that 3 times? L'rabot kol ha'geulot shenigalot b'seder hazeh. We say the exact same thing, and this is where Rav Nachman said it, and that's why we copied his answer into the previous section. It's like what we call the copy paste. Okay, he said it here, which is what? There, the discussion was about selling the house in the Yer Choma. Here, the discussion is about selling, right? About redeeming the Eved Ivri, right? They're redeeming the house in the Yer Choma, and here it's redeeming the Eved Ivri. L'rabot kol ha'geulot shenigalot b'seder hazeh. So yigalenu sounds like it's telling you that Every time there's redemption, it's done in this way, meaning with relatives, which would then teach you, my love, does it not teach you, Israel, right? A Jew sold to a Jew that you can redeem, the relatives can redeem, to which they reject and say, say, no. It's talking about a house in a non-walled city, which is just like the Steach Huzah. And the Eved Ivri, who, right? So then they say, specifically, they're talking about the house here. What do you mean? It says it explicitly there. What it's coming to teach you is the order in which you're supposed to do it. So just like he said it there, we're going to bring it to our sugya, and that was all just to see where did he say it. Okay, in which case, again, the krovim, according to this, Eved Ivri is not sold to relatives, right? And neither is the house in a walled city. Can't be redeemed by relatives. Sorry, not sold, redeemed by relatives. I meant in both cases. Okay, that was the end of the very complicated part of today's daf. Now moving on to the nirtza. Now we're just going back to the Mishnah. Someone who gets his ear pierced because he wants to stay longer with his master is nikne b'ritzia, is acquired by piercing the ear. How do we know this? Because it says it in the pasuk. The adon, right, pierces the ear with the martzeh. He lives in the Jubilee year, and when the master dies, this we saw already, you work for him only. So if he dies, you don't work for any other relatives, you get free. Le'olam, what does le'olam mean? It means le'olam shel yovel, you go out in the Jubilee year. Tanu Rabbanan. Now the question is, what can you use, what implements, okay, to pierce the ear? Martzeh, we're going to have a bachluk. And li'ala martzeh. The Torah says martzeh, right, which is an awl. Use an awl. Minayin l'rabot hasol v'asira v'amacha v'makteach v'maktev. We don't have time to go into this, but there's a different opinion, right? Either types of thorns, toothpicks, needle, some sort of stylus, all different implements that make holes. Talmud lomar v'lakachta l'rabot kol davar shenikach bayad. The word v'lakachta to martzeh, take the martzeh, take anything. Okay, it's a riboy pasuk. Divrei Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Omer, martzeh miyuchad shematechet, avkol shematechet. No, it has to be like a martzeh. This is all cloud, project cloud. We're going to get there in a minute. So martzeh is metal. It has to be metal. It can't be a toothpick or a thorn, which are not made of metal. Davar acher, one other drasha here. Hamartzeh lavi martzeh gadol, a very big one. Either you have to use a very big one, or you can even use a very big one. It's debate about how to understand this. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Yudin beRebbi hayad doresh. Okay, he quotes Yudin beRebbi, who used to say, "Kashen rotzin en rotzin ela b'milta." They do it in the earlobe. The Chachamim omrim, and he disagrees. Ein Eved Ivri Kohen nirtza. He says it's a fact on the ground that an Eved Ivri Kohen can't be nirtza. Why not? Because he's making himself to be a blemished Kohen, which you can't do. Later, we're going to ask why you can't do that. And if you say he did it in the earlobe, how can he turn himself into a ba'amum? I'm sorry, he doesn't turn himself into a ba'amum. To make a hole in your earlobe doesn't make you a blemished Kohen. So, to which he says, it must be you pierce at the top of the ear into the cartilage. That would make him a ba'amum. Says a whole, you could get into here about, is it okay to pierce ears? Is it okay to pierce ears where? Anyway, food for thought. Anyway, now, what's the real debate between them? Why do we say metal or only metal or maybe other implements? Well, Rebbe, who was more limiting, Rebbe, who said even metal, Rebbe said, my mistake, said only metal. Why? Klali uprate. He does the klal uprat versus the riboy miyut. You might remember this kind of distinction. Klal uprat works like this. V'lakachta klal, martzeh prat. And then they're missing a key word in the pasuk. Most people think it's the next pasuk, which is v'natata. Bozno bedelit. We're now in the psukim and Sefer Tvalim about the Eved Ivri. So you take, which is a general. You take what? The martzeh, that's specific. And then it says, and you put him by the delit and you put it in the ear and by the door. So you put it again is like the lakachta is like a riboy, anything. So chazar v'kalal, klal upratu klal, iyat hadan elakei prat. When you have a general, specific and a general, it's only things that are like the prat. It's very limiting. So ma prat mifurash matechet, afkol matechet. The martzeh is with metal, therefore anything metal. Rabbi Yossi derish riboy miut. It's the same exact type drasha, it's just a different style. This style is a more general. It includes more. The lakachta riba martzeh mi'et bozno bor v'natata bozno b'delech chazar v'riba. Same three words. Riba mi'et v'riba hakol. So when it then adds this extra general term, it includes everything. My Rabbi Komili, my mi-8 sam. What does it include? It includes everything. What does it narrow it down to? You can't put like a cream or an ointment, some sort of liquid or something like that, which is going to wear away and make a hole. It has to be something that you poke a hole with. But it doesn't matter what it is. Okay. 2 last things for today, and then we'll stop. Amar, hamartzea lahavi hamartzea gadol. My mashma. How did you get to martzea gadol from the word hamartzea? Amarava hayereth. When it talks about the gid and asher, it says the calf. Hamiyumenet shebiyarach, the right calf. Hachanami hamartzea miyuchad shebemartzeim. That means the one that's the special one, which means a big. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Yudim Rabbi Hayad Doresh. Now we go back to this Kohen Balmum. Shem Rotzin, Ein Rotzin Ela B'Milton. Chamim say, Ein Eved Ivri Kohen Nirtzam B'Pnei Shnasa Balmum. V'Yaseh Balmum. So what? You can make yourself blemished too. It's not like it's forbidden for a Kohen to make himself blemished. It just means once he's blemished, he can't work in the temple. Now, that's a problem because Amar Rabbi Rashila Amar Kraf V'Shava Mishpachto. It says when you go back after the Jubilee year, you go back to your family. What do we learn from this? You go back to the exact same way you were before. If you worked in the temple before, then you have to go back in a way that you can work in the temple, and therefore you can't turn yourself into a balmum. And therefore, he learned that the piercing would have to be at the bottom, right? Would have to be at the top, because the whole reason every Kohen who's an Eved Ivri can't do it is because he's turning himself into a blemished Kohen. Okay, we're going to stop here for today. I know we didn't get far enough, and it took a long time, but this was a complicated daf, as the previous ones. What we're going to do tomorrow is talk about Kohanim, and are there different laws for Kohanim in certain areas that have to do with Eved Ivri, and then other things as well that we're going to get off to from there. And from there, we're going to get to Eshet Yifat Toar. So that's for tomorrow. We'll stop here for today. I recommend you use the study guide to do a bit of a review, or perhaps even listen again, because the more times you go through it, if you have the time, complicated sugyot, if you read them again, they make a lot more sense the second time around. Wishing everyone a great day and a great week.